Hey there, long time no see. We're doing something immensely dorky today. Uh, I have no idea what I'm going to title this yet, but the gist of it is, I'm a huge fan of Critical Role. I like Dungeons and Dragons in general. I am currently a DM to two separate groups myself. Um, but there's one thing in particular that, let me rewind a bit. The second campaign of Critical Role is my favorite. Um, I can't exactly say why. Maybe it's the tone of the campaign. I feel like the characters are just particularly, they really stand out to me in the second campaign compared to the other two. But regardless, I'm partway, maybe about halfway through my third watch of the entire second campaign because I'm that much of a fucking dork. And also because I work jobs where I can put in earbuds and I've got to have my entertainment somehow. So, but something that gets brought up from time to time in the comments that, I feel like I have some relevant experience in. There's a lot of discussion around how the fuck Jester Lavorre, one of the party's clerics, got her strength stat. You see, the background on this character is that she grew up essentially in isolation, living, I want to say she's roughly in her 20s, 20s to early 30s perhaps, and until like the events of the series, basically spent that entire 20, 30 years of her life living inside of one building, a place called the Lavish Chateau. It's sort of an inn and lounge where her mother, Marion Lavorre, the Ruby of the Sea, works as a courtesan, a singer, a socialite, etc. But the problem is, of course, Marion is agoraphobic and stays inside the chateau. And so Jester did not get out much, or perhaps not at all, as a child, all the way up until her adulthood. And she left and, took the journey that led to her meeting the rest of the party. And a lot of people, they feel as though it is unrealistic that she would be as strong as she is. Now, first of all, we have to make a note about realism here because this is fucking Dungeons and Dragons. Like, there has to be a suspension of disbelief somewhere. This is a world where there's magic and dragons and zombies. At the same time, I completely understand that elements of realism do add to the game. They can make the world feel more immersive. They can make for interesting mechanics that make the game more fun. I remember one of my earliest experiences with D&D. I was a player. I was only like 15 or so, playing with a much older group in general, like mid-20s, some of them. And we were using characters that were like old characters that had been in the DM's stash for a while. And I got a monk that was kind of like fire themed. For some reason, this monk had in his inventory a shitload of lantern oil, and somebody else in the party triggered a fire trap, essentially. And when we were like checking everyone's inventory to see how bad the damages were, we got around to me and found that I was carrying like a gallon of lantern oil in my pack. And of course that that introduced some issues for the party as we triggered this fire trap. Shit like that, you could easily gloss over that, not pay any attention to it. It's not part of the base game mechanics necessarily, but, in real life, if you were to get firebombed and you were carrying a gallon of, kerosene or something similar, that would cause problems for you. And the idea that was brought into the game as like an added layer of risk or danger, and now you have to think about like, you have to have some concerns about what you're carrying, how you're carrying it, how you're progressing through the world. Like, shit like that it's really cool. It's nice to have relatively realistic elements to make the game, I wouldn't say more believable, but it just makes the world feel a bit more alive. So I totally understand that. But at the same time, of course, this is a cleric, and a thing that a lot of people don't realize about clerics, especially newer players, like you mentioned the idea of playing a cleric, and they're like, oh, I don't want to play a healer, I want to play somebody who can fight, do cool shit, whatever. Clerics do plenty of cool shit. Any of you who have watched any of the Critical Role campaigns, but especially Campaign 2, know that clerics can do all kinds of cool shit, and actually surprisingly strong. You know, Jester wields an axe and a shield, and wears either the heaviest armor or the second heaviest armor. You know, it's not like I've actually sat down and picked apart everyone's inventory, but she's either the heaviest armored or second heaviest armored of the entire group. And yeah, so clerics do have a high strength stat. And of course, they're not going to bend the rules of the game around the lore, or whatever you want to call it, the flavor, I suppose, of Jester's backstory. But the point I'm going to try to make here today is that they wouldn't have to. So for some clarification on my own background, I used to be around 408 pounds. Everyone who watches my channel knows that I've gone through this whole weight loss thing. Clearly, I'm not that big anymore. Right now, like last night, I weighed in at 197. I didn't weigh myself today, but anyways, I've lost a lot of weight. And of course, most of that has just been eating less, doing meal prep, shit like that. But also, of course, I've been trying to do cardio and strength training, etc. I was way into Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a while. I haven't really had the schedule or the money to keep up with that, unfortunately. If I did, I totally would. I love that shit. But anyways, so I have some perspective on this. But there is a caveat I have to make in that I have no formal training, so I am not an exercise scientist, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a physical therapist, I am none of that. I mostly work warehouse and factory jobs. I didn't go to college. So I don't want anyone to take this as a recommendation or a workout plan or anything. But I am going to just brainstorm some possible ideas as to how one would develop a particular level of strength, not like world-class power lifter or like strongman competitor, but it is possible to do some degree of strength training in isolation with not much space and not much equipment. I know this because I've done so. And also, I think one of the most damning real-world examples of this is, unfortunately, it's an awful thing, but the American prison system. People go in, they come out jacked if they, put in the effort to do so. Not everyone does, but it's a, I wouldn't say a running gag. It's not necessarily a joke, but it's a commonly known thing that, like, sometimes if a dude is like, real hardcore and wants to be a badass and he ends up going to prison, he may come out fucking ripped. The thing is, so strength training, the term that gets used all the time, progressive overload, is what you're looking for. You start with a level of resistance, a weight, any sort of, a challenging, a challenging weight or a load of resistance, whether it be a resistance band that's particularly hard to pull or push or otherwise stretch, or just a heavy object, something that is challenging for you. You work through your reps and sets. Over time, you move up to higher weights or, more stiffer resistance bands, whatever you're using. And that's the very basic idea of progressive overload as it relates to strength training. Heavier weight, harder resistance, over time, just increasing as you gradually become stronger. How am I going to put this? Okay, so in the lavish chateau, she mostly spent time in her room, but she did seemingly have run of basically the whole building. It's just she didn't particularly get outside much. So basically, anything you can do in an apartment, she would have had plenty of room for. She may have had room for, slightly more room than that. I feel like cardio would be more of a challenge than resistance training in that context, honestly. It's not like she's going to do a whole lot of running or sprinting or anything of the sort. Obviously no cycling or like skiing or anything like that. That could be more of a challenge, but again, I do cardio sessions here in my bedroom. Burpees are something that will fucking smoke you. Absolutely. Dancing. There are a lot of moments in the show where Jester will dance a lot. She clearly enjoys it, and being that her mother is an entertainer by trade, she could have had some training or direction in dancing that would be conducive to, you know, a higher level of skill. That's not exactly intense cardio. You know, it's not HIIT, whatever you want to call it. It's not that, of course, but it is like a steady state long form cardio, like walking or, you know, stair climbing or something that you can do for an extended period of time and build endurance more than necessarily just like an explosive, like sprint sort of short-term, high-intensity cardio. That would be where the burpees would come in. Things like that, Taibo type shit. You know, one of her closest friends growing up is her mother's Minotaur bodyguard, Blood. He could have absolutely taught her just some basic fighting type stuff. I mean, as much as you're like, why would this guy teach a child to fight? This is a high-energy, very hectic child cooped up in a single building for the first 2 decades of her life, maybe slightly more. I'm sure Marion would have loved to have a fucking break from Jester every now and then. And Blood, no offense, but he seems like he's maybe not necessarily the best with kids, maybe a bit pigeonholed into a particular skill set. If he had to entertain Jester, I'm sure that some very basic, very gentle, like martial arts sessions would not be out of the question. You could also perhaps wonder if that's where she picked up her basic weapon proficiencies. So there's also that. Possible that she may have helped the kitchen staff, especially handling like large casks of ale or wine, crates of wine bottles, stuff like that. If she helped the kitchen staff move those around, that would be one way that she could have trained both strength and endurance at the same time. That's kind of like my factory and warehouse jobs, where a lot of the shit in those jobs doesn't weigh a whole lot, but you are lifting, you know, several thousand of them per shift and being urged to do so quickly. So it's like slight resistance, long form cardio. It's a particular kind of endurance all its own. I call it endurance of strength or strength endurance, where it's less about all out cardio like a runner, and also not quite just raw force generation like powerlifting or strongman. It's the ability to do a low strength task consistently for ages, which is more like rucking, for example, would be a great one. That actually brings me to something. In terms of equipment, I feel like a lot of people assumed that there would be no equipment at all available. And of course, you know, it doesn't sound like she had a bench, a rack, a barbell, weight plates, anything like that. But there's still options. I have, sitting right next to me, the camera handoff here is a bit tricky. This is a backpack full of water bottles. I would guess it's like 20 to 30 pounds. It's been a hot minute since I actually weighed one of these. I've used this. This is not the first time I've used this. I'm trying to fucking get it open so I can pull out some of the goddamn bottles. I also have my heavy gloves in here. I've got 20-ounce boxing gloves. They smell fantastic. Years of Muay Thai in those. But yeah, I've got like, here's an old Mountain Dew bottle. It does not have actual Mountain Dew in it anymore. It's just full of water. I've just got a bunch of bottles full of water in that pack. Sand is another good option. I also have here one of my ammo cans. It's the 50 caliber size. I don't own anything chambered in 50 caliber. I can't afford that. That one is full of shotgun shells at the moment. You can fill that with sand or whatever. And of course, in the world of D&D, like, you know, they don't have like modern military ammo cans or ammunition, But they have crates and burlap sacks, dry rice, sand, whatever. Especially like sacks of dry rice, I would assume would be around the chateau. Sacks of flour. You could tape or tie a couple of those to a stick, and suddenly you've got like a fixed weight barbell that wouldn't be super heavy, but I mean, it would provide some resistance. And especially if you're doing calisthenics would be the base, the core of a lot of this. And calisthenics kind of gets a bad rap as far as not helping you generate much strength. That's if you do like the most basic variation of everything, just a standard push-up, a standard bodyweight squat. What about like pistol squats, one-handed push-ups? Like there's some very difficult variations of basic calisthenic exercises that don't require any added equipment. They just require a progression through skill level in terms of both like your balance and flexibility, but also just your raw strength. Like it takes a lot to do a one-handed push-up. That is a lot of like strain. It requires a lot of force generation out of your triceps in particular, your shoulders, everything like that. To progress up to that is kind of a big deal. A lot of people who, actually lift real weights still can't do like a one-handed push-up. It's fucking challenging. Of course, I'm not saying she would have started with one-handed push-ups. That's obviously ridiculous. But you can do a whole progression where you're doing like incline push-ups against a wall or a piece of furniture, to standard push-ups, to close grip, and then close grip at like a reverse incline where your feet are elevated to increase the difficulty there. One-handed push-ups, again, at an incline against like a piece of furniture or something to make them a little easier, and then just gradually lower that until you're at the point where you can actually do one-handed push-ups on the ground. It would take a while, but again, we're talking about an extremely energetic, extremely creative child that has very little social contact and is stuck inside of a single building for the first 2 to 3 decades of her life. I mean, she's going to find a way if she wants to. That's the thing, is like the boredom here is a huge factor that can also be a driving factor. Again, going back to the real world example of dudes in prison getting jacked. What else are you going to do in there? Like, there's some limited degree of libraries available sometimes. Like sometimes prisoners can get books. They would have more social interaction than Jester does, unless they're like in protective custody or isolation. If they're in general population, they would have more chance to be more social than Jester did. Of course, electronics don't exist in at least the fictional world that Critical Role uses. So what else is she going to do? I mean, obviously she has her drawing, painting, etc. But a child has a lot of energy. And especially a peppy personality like Jester would just be bouncing off the fucking walls. That energy has got to go somewhere. And so I completely find it believable that she would be doing push-ups, sit-ups, a progression of just regular bodyweight squats, squats with some kind of improvised weight, going all the way up to pistol squats eventually. Anything she could do, handstands. She specifically says on the show in some episode, I think it's in the 20s or 30s, they're in Nicodranus, I believe. She mentions that she would climb on Blood's horns when she was a little. That's essentially somewhere between like pull-ups and dips. If she started when she was basically a toddler, she has plenty of time to make that progression over time, both as her body increases in size because she's growing, but also as her regimen continues along. Like, that's plenty of time starting so young to continue that progression until you get to a higher level of strength. Again, you wouldn't expect her to be like a power lifter or a strongman, but also like, she doesn't have the highest strength stat in the party, but it's appreciably high. And I think that's totally feasible. So yeah, I think the core here would be, you would start off with calf raises done with both legs and just your body weight, progress to a single leg calf raise, start adding improvised weights to that, You could do the same thing with your body weight squats. Again, just a standard body weight squat on both legs, progress to, using a weighted device, then lunges, split squats, pistol squats eventually, pistol squats with a weight of some sort. If you can do that, like, you have pretty good legs at that point. A pull-up bar is something that we think of as very modern, but it's not a complicated piece of equipment. I think it's not outside of the realm of possibility in this world where there are zombies and vampires and dragons and minotaurs that to think that there could be some kind of primitive push-up bar type deal implemented somewhere in the lavish chateau. That's another thing, is she had access to her mother's wealth, which Marion Lavorre is fucking loaded. So there are a lot of things that she could have gotten access to. She wouldn't have gone out and bought them, but somebody could have been requested to bring it to the chateau. A very primitive weight like a cast iron kettlebell would not be hard to make. I mean, the world has medieval technology, but iron casting has been around for a long fucking time, and a kettlebell is a very simple object. To think that, there's no fucking way that she could have possibly gotten her hands on some kind of a cast iron kettlebell or a fixed weight dumbbell that's just, a piece of cast iron that's a handle with bulbs at the end formed into it as one piece. Like, those have been around for fucking forever. I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility for her to get access to such equipment. A legit barbell, sure, no. But you don't necessarily need one. It certainly helps. I would recommend, if you're undergoing a strength training regimen of any kind, absolutely get a barbell. Going back to the idea of limited space, I have, across the room, I can see it from here, a 5-foot barbell that I keep in my room. I keep some of my weight plates up here. I keep the heavy ones, like the 25s, 35s, and 45s, down in the basement with my actual bench and rack. But I've got a set of 2.5s, a pair of 5s, a pair of 10s on the floor over there next to that 5-foot barbell. A standard length for a barbell is 7 feet. The 5-foot one fits in my room better. So I can put those smaller weight plates on there, just stack them up, and I can do barbell complexes, where I'll start with it on the floor, I'll deadlift it off the floor, I'll do a clean to get it up to like chest level, I'll overhead press it, bring it back down behind my back, and go into a squat. Come up, do a calf raise, get it back over my head, put it back down to chest level, put it back down to like hip level, and then I don't know what the term would be, Romanian deadlift, reverse deadlift, whatever, to put it back on the floor, and that's 1 rep of a barbell complex. And so it's not a whole lot of weight, but I can do a shitload of those with a lower level of weight, and it's training both that endurance of strength and also cardio at the same time, because that will fucking gas you, absolutely, doing those for time. See, I think it's completely feasible that Jester would have a decent strength. It just takes some creativity, it takes some time. You can improvise a degree of equipment. It's not going to be professional level. It's obviously not going to be the ideal training regimen either. But I mean, there's the running gag, the stereotype of calisthenics athletes is that like some of the most like high level calisthenics dudes that are like not necessarily competing professionally, but like that can do some really impressive shit, like where they hang from a pole like a flag, like horizontally hanging off the pole. That it's a bunch of Russian dudes that live in Soviet apartment blocks. They don't have a lot of space. They don't have the financial access to a whole lot of equipment, but they can still get pretty fucking strong because they know their calisthenics and they do these progressions through these increasingly more difficult variations of these movements. So yeah, I think it's completely within the realm of possibility. If you're doing, pull-ups don't require much equipment at all. A bar that is sturdily affixed to a doorway or ceiling, or even just like some kind of a rack where, and I've thought about like trying to get help, particularly from my dad in building something like this before, where it's it's a stand where it has legs and then like bars that go up to, you know, I don't know what you would set it, like 7 foot, 8 foot, something like that. And then just a horizontal bar across, and that would be like a pull-up station. And you could have handles coming down from that. That would be a dip station. There are, of course, shorter dip stations that, you know, they're maybe about like hip height. And you get down onto, like, they're basically handrails on either side of you. These are not hard things to build. And a lot of, you know, elements of other structures that are not intended for these purposes can be used that way. Just depending on, you know, how they're shaped, where they're located, how sturdy they are, like what their weight capacity is. So there's your back workout right there. And if you have the capacity to do dips, that's triceps as well. The one-handed push-ups would do triceps, close grip push-ups before that as part of the progression to get to one-handed push-ups. Regular push-ups, push-ups with a weight on your back, like the backpack full of water bottles. You know, carrying heavy shit around. Like, there's a lot of ways to do it. And again, you're not going to get to like Olympic level athlete that way, but you would definitely be, as long as you were doing it consistently over a long period of time and actually following a progression where it kept getting heavier, you could really get a lot farther than you would think, honestly. And so that's my idea of how that would be feasible without like breaking the realism at all. Again, like, I'm talking about this because this is like entertainment for me. Like, of course, this fitness type stuff is like a hobby for me, and it's also like a huge part of my life recently. And of course, I love Dungeons and Dragons. I love Critical Role. So this is just like me nerding out about some of my favorite shit. I will never understand the people who take this like super seriously and like straight up get upset. They're like, oh, I can't fucking stand Critical Role because shit like Jester Lavorre being strong when she grew up locked in a room her whole life. Like, chill the fuck out. It's a D&D show on the internet. Calm down. Like, it is not that serious. So yeah, I don't want it to be taken as me being salty. I think the people who are salty are ridiculous. But this is something I like to think about. It's an interesting idea as someone who, you know, takes an interest in fitness and also has a very limited budget and not a whole lot of space. Like, what are the ways that you can game this limited amount of space and improvised equipment? Like, what can you do creatively to make this work for you? And I think there are a lot of ways you can do that. It just requires some creativity. And of course, a character like Jester Lavorre has creativity in spades. So there's my analysis, my opinion. I think it's totally feasible. It would just be really fucking hard, but I mean, that's training in general. Any sort of cardio conditioning, strength training, especially both at the same time, it's always going to be hard. It's always going to require a lot of thought and planning and just unimaginable amounts of effort. But if you are an extremely energetic and creative person that is stuck inside of a single building for 20 to 30 years, you know, what else are you going to fucking do, to be honest? So, there you have it. Probably the fucking geekiest video I've ever put out, ever will put out. But you know what? I had fun, and it's cool to think about some of this shit. Maybe I gave some people some ideas. But anyways, I'll see you around.